Unable to stand the cold, I step out onto the balcony of my hotel room with bottled water from the mini fridge. Having recovered a bit from my shower, I finally have time to do what I do best, which is to think. What planet did my plane land on 2 days ago? I wonder. And as I think back over the last 50 hours, several things become apparent, and one of them is that I have no idea what's going on. The dilemma continued early yesterday morning when two uniformed police officers showed up shortly after my conversation with the doctor. After a few questions on their part, I was for a moment close to coming clean and naming names when my conservative nature shouted at me to keep my mouth shut. If Susie is decisive almost to the point of impulsiveness, I am decidedly analytical and contemplative. Susie's quick actions serve her well in a volatile courtroom, and because she usually hits the mark, she manages to seize the moment and uncover the truth. I am almost the opposite of my character, as I dot all the I's and cross all the T's. Susie rushes headlong into the battlefield to fight the enemy. I, on the other hand, prefer to tiptoe around and sneak up behind them. No, I think to myself. Talking to the police was clearly not the best decision. I sure as hell don't want rumors about what happened Friday night to get out. Not unless that bastard Schmidt is somehow behind it. It's bad enough what they said about me at the hospital, but they could only assume what happened and that Susie was somehow involved. No, I definitely don't want this to get out, and if I were to lay it all out in the open to the police, I'd lose all my cranky control. With a heavy sigh, I think about the fact that Susie might be involved in all of this. Since Schmidt is involved, I'm sure there was some coercion involved. We can only hope that Susie may have been under a lot of stress. But while I've seen her ruthless nature before, I've never seen her as angry as she was Friday night. She was so angry she didn't even look like herself. There's more behind all this than the alleged cheating on my part, and I'm sure it's Schmidt. He's the real enemy here. Susie's just a random victim like me, isn't she? But what if she's not a victim? What if Susie's deeply involved in all this crap? If that's the case, I don't see a way back. And if Susie is involved, then my decision not to talk to the police is even more right. Her ties to the police as an ADA could make the situation even worse than it is. I am reminded again of my interview with the police while in the hospital. What started out as a friendly interrogation turned into an adversarial interrogation as my answers were unspecific. I'm sure they didn't believe me when I stated that I really couldn't remember anything from the moment I got into the car at the airport until I woke up in the hospital. But the last question they asked made me tense up and ask who they should contact to inform me of my situation. I suddenly realized that I had no one I wanted them to contact. Being an only child, I had no choice but to call my parents tonight, and that was very difficult. I have been somewhat estranged from my father for more years than I care to admit. The only truly good relationship I had was with my mother, but apparently that's no longer the case. The only person I would have bonded with is Susie, the same person I'm unlikely to bond with now. Susie has a similar situation. She's an only child. I know from our conversations that her father left the family when Susie was a teenager, and Susie has no relationship with her mother at all. The only time I met her mother was at our wedding. On top of that, I realized that I don't know who can be my friends and who can't. I know Susie had already told her side of the story to my parents. Who else has she talked to? There are a lot more questions than answers right now, at least for me. Monday, 7:57 a.m. Jake, I don't know how to say this, Tom says as he closes the door to my office. I lean back in my chair and look at Tom Weston, the managing partner of this firm and a longtime friend. I gesture with my hand, motioning for Tom to take any of the seats in front of my desk. Unfortunately, we don't have time. Protocol says you shouldn't even be allowed into the office, Tom adds, barely making eye contact with me. At least tell me what this is about, I ask. Given the events of the past few days, I'm already guessing. Yesterday, an emergency HR meeting was called to discuss some recent allegations regarding your behavior and actions. A formal interview with the personnel officer has been scheduled for 8 a.m. This morning? I rise in surprise. Yes. And you held a personnel meeting on Sunday? Jake, this is serious shit. The meeting was called by HR, given your high management status at the firm. I'm here as managing partner of this firm, but I'm also here as a friend. You're in deep shit, Jake, and you have some serious decisions to make in a very short period of time. Where's the meeting? I muttered, rising from my seat. Jake, I'm warning you as your friend. Don't lose your mind. Come on, the meeting is in the executive conference room. Tom walks out of my office and heads into the conference room. I look at the clock and see that it's 8 a.m. and Heidi isn't at her desk. If there's one thing Heidi knows how to do, it's be punctual. I expected her to be gone today, but that doesn't lessen my need to talk to her. Who's going to be at the meeting? I ask. Me and Hinckley, of course. I had to appoint Evans as your deputy. Rolansky and Schmidt are the other two. Schmidt. I explode. Tom flinches, casts a brief glance at me, then averts his eyes. I know you don't like him, but you know how this procedure works. Heck, you practically wrote the HR review process. I don't like it any more than you do. I know it like the back of my hand, I think to myself. I do a quick mental check that there are 5 managers or higher involved. 3 of them are standing their ground. The first is the managing partner, which is Tom. The second is the executive human resources manager, which is Hinckley. The third is the general counsel position, which until this morning was held by me. The other 2 seats are assigned on a case-by-case basis. One is appointed by the human resources manager and the other by the managing partner. I assume you've appointed Rolansky? No. I'll pretend I didn't hear that so we can remain friends, he replies. Tom reaches out his hand and stops me. You know I shouldn't tell you, but I can't let you go in there completely unarmed. You'll be offered a severance package to resign. The group as a whole has decided that the best thing for the firm is to avoid unnecessary lawsuits and publicity. The best way to accomplish this was to resign. There was nothing I could do to stop this case, Jake. All I could do was make the severance package as palatable as they would let me. I lean my back against the wall. I feel numb. I can't believe this is all happening. How did everything go downhill so fast? I think to myself. Jake, are you okay? Asks Tom. No, I'm not okay, Tom. Just give me a few minutes. You're going to have to stay alert, Jake. I'm aware of that, Tom. Thank you. Just give me a minute to get my balance. That sounded a lot sharper than I wanted it to. I look at Tom, and he's smiling. When all is said and done, Jake, I hope we remain as close friends. Don't worry about that, Tom. Okay, let's go. Tom leads me around the corner and stops for a moment in front of the door to the conference room. He takes one last look at me and then opens the door. I walk in following Tom and see 4 people seated on opposite sides of the table. Tom takes his seat at the head of the table, leaving the only empty chairs on my side. I take the middle chair directly across from Christy. I look at her, and for a moment our gazes meet before she drops her gaze to her hands folded on the table. I really admire and respect her. I hired her myself straight out of UT. I didn't even consider a candidate from an Eastern school. I wanted someone familiar with the culture and independent lifestyle of Texas. I developed her as a pet project, but honestly, she didn't need much pruning. I know her as a hell of a coworker, and now, sitting on the other side of the table, as a formidable competitor. Mr. Vickers, Hinckley begins the meeting. You were invited here as a participant in a personnel policy review meeting. There was an interview yesterday in which the 5 of us reviewed allegations of inappropriate behavior. These are serious allegations and against company policy. Such misconduct is punishable by termination. I'm sorry to interrupt you, I cut in, not apologizing in the slightest. But I want him out of this meeting. I point directly at Schmidt, sitting next to Hinckley. Mr. Vickers, I'm afraid you have no right to influence the composition of this group. You're right. I don't have the opportunity to contribute. But I do have a situation where there is a known animosity between Schmidt and me. Everyone in this room knows it. In the event the situation escalates into a wrongful termination suit, you have made my case much stronger by seating a man who is known to be biased. An awkward silence reigns in the room immediately after I utter the magic three-word phrase, wrongful termination lawsuit. I make an effort on myself and look at each of the panelists except Schmidt. Miss Hinckley, Schmidt says. I'll step aside if the commission prefers someone else. But I am on record as saying that while Vickers and I are not the best of friends, I believe the word feud is too strong a word. I also know that I can serve this commission without any perceived bias. Is there anyone who thinks Mr. Schmidt would be biased in his role on this commission? Asks Hinckley openly. I cast a glance across the table at Christie. This time her expression is impassive as she fixes her gaze on me. This time she doesn't flinch, and I finally avert my gaze. She knows as well as I do that Schmidt can't be impartial. She's learned her lessons too well, I think to myself. I can't read her facial expression at all. Then if no one believes Mr. Schmidt would be biased, I don't believe that. I know that. I interrupt, glaring venomously at Schmidt. It has already been established that you had nothing to do with the composition of the commission. Great, I reply. You may be planning my funeral right now, but rest assured you've just dug the 5th shovelful of dirt on this firm's own grave. 5th? Asks Rolansky. I glanced at Rolansky, perplexed as to why Tom had appointed him to the panel. As far as I knew, he only handled inspections in his own department. He certainly wasn't involved in anything that high up the management chain. Don't encourage him, Hinckley warned. I want to know why he thinks this is the 5th shovel. What were the first 4? Rolansky insists. Did you hold an official interview meeting yesterday? I ask Christie, knowing I'll get a straight answer. Yes, she replies. I look at Rolansky. There you are. You shoveled the first 4 handfuls of dirt yesterday when you conducted the formal interview without me. I have a right to examine the evidence. I have the right to challenge my accusers. You denied me those rights. Jake, you know as well as I do that this is a company, and the Bill of Rights doesn't apply to corporations. This isn't a criminal case, Christie cut in. But I still have rights as outlined in the employment contract each of us signed. And that employment contract says I have the right to be present at the interview. I have the right to hear what I'm being accused of and to respond orally to the interview panel as well as in writing. The procedure for considering candidates for senior positions in HR does not say that attendance at an interview is a requirement, she objects. Isn't it difficult to conduct an interview without the interview subject being present? Also, the general HR discipline model states that I have the right to see any allegations and respond to them. I am both a supervisor and an employee. I contend that both policies apply. If you examine the policies, you will find that there are no conflicting clauses. I, for one, have made sure of that, and it will be interesting to see how the civil court looks at it. Jake, Tom cut in, all this talk of courts and lawsuits gives me an ulcer. The purpose of this meeting is to offer you a severance package. It's a very attractive offer, considering the circumstances, if I do say so myself. Am I fired? I ask Tom bluntly. Tom looks at Christie. Out of the corner of my eye, I see her shake her head. No, he replies. Let's see the proposal, I reply. Hinckley holds out a briefcase to me across the table. I look at the outside of the briefcase and then take it with both hands. I'll give it serious consideration and get back to you by the end of the week. The panel members suddenly exchange glances. We want you to consider the severance package and make a decision right now. I sit stunned. Tom had warned me to be on my guard and that I would have to make important decisions quickly. Let me understand, I begin, trying to stall for time. You want me to consider this offer now and make a decision immediately? Yes, Hinckley replies. I can't do that, I simply reply. Then we withdraw the severance offer, she replies. Not so fast, Tom cuts in again. Jake, I realize this will probably hit you like a hurricane, but what if you went back to your office and reconsidered the offer, and then meet with us? Say, at noon, and let us know your decision? Mr. Weston, Hinckley interrupted. That's not what we decided yesterday. Tom's penetrating stare at Hinckley silences her half-heartedly. Tom, I reply, I appreciate the extra time, but there just isn't enough of it. How much time do you need, Jake? I told you, at least until the end of the week. We can't give that much time, began Hinckley. Tom, I haven't had a chance to look at those numbers. I haven't had a chance to review the charges that have been made against me. I haven't had an opportunity to prepare any response. You mean you haven't seen the affidavits or the photographs? Exclaimed Christie suddenly. I look back at her. I didn't even hear about them until Friday night, I say, resisting the urge to look at Schmidt. I keep hearing about these damned documents, but no one seems to have provided me with copies of them. And I want to remind this commission that it has yet to formally charge me. The intention is to avoid this, Jake, Christie states the obvious. And my intention is not to avoid it. Do you have those documents? Christie looks at Tom, then at me. We have the original affidavit, but only copies of the photos. I need copies of both. Strike that. I need the originals of what you have. You can copy them if you want. Jake, we won't turn over the original affidavits. And for privacy reasons, we won't turn over the photos. If we need a formal meeting with the head of HR on Wednesday, then we'll show you the documents. Leave the photos. I know they're fake anyway, but I need the original affidavit. Jake, we can't do that, Christie replies. If I'm not given the opportunity to examine the original to prove it wasn't forged, you'll only strengthen my wrongful termination claim. I need that original, and I need time, at least until the end of the week, I add with emphasis. I'm sure you already have multiple copies of all the documents. And if the affidavit is valid, what am I supposed to do? Destroy it? You could just reprint the affidavit and sign it again. Jake, can you give us a minute to discuss this? Asks Christie. Sure, I reply, rising slowly from my chair, and I'm sure Schmidt didn't miss it. And Miss Evans, I add. Christie tilts her head inquisitively, the way she always does when I want to get a point across. Trust your judgment and experience, I state, and turn and walk out of the room, leaving the exit slip on the table. I close the door and lean against it. I can hear talking and arguing. Hinckley and Schmidt are clearly on the same side. Schmidt is the clear opponent. But I've never had a problem with Hinckley before. Why is she getting in my way now? Tom is on my side, and Rolansky seems to agree with him. They argue that the extra week will do no harm, and what's more, avoid even more legal problems with the wrongful termination lawsuit. Hinckley and Schmidt argue that the company could get sued at any time, and failure to act promptly could show that the company condones such actions. They argue that so far the company has followed procedure, and there is no reason not to continue. They also flatly refuse to provide me with any documents, even copies of them. They said that the documents can be provided to me during the official verification by the HR management. I could hear both sides talking over each other. I realized that Tom's choice of Rolansky is lucky for me. The only voice I didn't hear was Christie's. For the next minute, I hear only the soft tones of Christie's voice. I smile to myself. She is as good a counselor as can be. I hear silence and then footsteps. I manage to back away from the door so I don't fall when Tom opens the door and asks me to come in. I close the door behind me and walk over to the table. Christie seems to have taken control of the panel as she waves for me to sit back in my chair. I smile and explain that I prefer to stand, preferring not to explain why. Jake, we have a counteroffer. I need at least until the end of the week. If you'll hear me out? I nod. We ask that you take your severance package with you and seriously consider it. We ask that you come back on Wednesday at noon and give us your answer. At this point, you are not fired. We have not yet begun a formal review with Human Resources. Depending on your response on Wednesday, we may decide to officially begin that process. In the meantime, we have decided to place you on administrative leave. Unless we ask you to be present, you are not to be on company property or have access to any documents, whether paper or electronic. Except, she paused, we'll give you the original affidavit, but not photographs. Obviously, we expect them to be returned. If need be, you'll see a copy of the pictures on Wednesday. Christie looks at me expectantly. I smile and internally applaud. That's damn close to what I'd do. Without waiving any rights granted to me by company policy, I agree to your proposal. I assume someone can escort me to my office so I can pick up a few personal items I may need over the next few days? Hinckley starts to say something, but Christie quickly replies that that would be acceptable. She looks at Tom, and he nods. Mr. Weston will serve as your escort. The meeting is obviously over, and I pick up the package. I cast a glance at Christie and wink. She doesn't respond, but I see the faint trace of a smile at the corner of her mouth. But that tiny smile doesn't hide her misty eyes. I leave the room first and step aside. I watch as they all silently leave and go about their business. Tom is the last to leave. He looks at me and just sighs. You warned me, Tom, I reply, putting my hand on his shoulder as we walk back to my office. Monday, 9:31 a.m. Mr. Vickers, would you mind following me? I sigh heavily and stand up, following the receptionist through the double doors that say Sutter, Klein, and Gambino on them. Susie sent me a text message right before she walked into my office this morning, letting me know that the meeting would be held at our family attorney's office. Normally, meeting with an attorney is considered bad form, but Vicky has been friends with both Susie and me for years. I smile warmly at her, even though I want to slap her and the 3 or 4 people I've already met. No one pays any attention to me as I walk past cubicles and desks back to Susie and Vicky's office, but I feel their stares and hear whispers behind me. The receptionist leads me to the frosted glass door of the conference room. I open the door and walk in, noticing Vicky sitting next to Susie on the opposite end of the table. 2 empty chairs stand on the side closest to the door. Have a seat, Jake, Vicky Gambino says to me. I push the padded chair away from the desk and slowly sit down, perhaps a little slower than necessary. Is your lawyer located near you? She asks. I cast a puzzled look at her and then glance at my wife, who immediately lowers her eyes. Well, Vicky, first of all, it's good to see you. Second, why do I need a lawyer? Vicky averts her gaze and then leans slightly toward me. In a softer voice, she says, Jake, surely you're not going to represent yourself. Do I need representation? Susie called me last night and asked me to be here so we could talk. At first, she tried to get me to meet at her office, but I had to remind her of the court order and that I wasn't going to violate it. I was surprised when she texted me this morning that we would meet at our family lawyer's office, but then considered it a good thing. Despite the pain and betrayal I've been through lately, I'd like to see if we can still work something out. I'm beginning to suspect that perhaps I've been too optimistic. Vicky looks at Susie. You didn't tell him? I asked him to be here at 9:30 in the morning so we could talk things over. I can't help it if he jumped to some conclusions, Susie says without emotion. You didn't tell him that. Vicky stops halfway through and looks hurt. Recovering, she says, I see, in that case, perhaps we should reschedule. I think we should continue, Susie says. I'd like to get this over with. The purpose of the meeting is now more than clear. As the saying goes, my mom didn't raise a fool. But I've had so much crap dumped on me in the last few days that I've had enough and I'm not going to take it anymore. If this is the end of it, I'll walk away in shame. Susie, in case you were wondering, I'm feeling a lot better now than I did on Friday, by the way. Susie turns pale. Jake, Mr. Vickers, if we are to continue our meeting, you will have to refrain from talking to Miss Vickers. I will have to ask you to direct your conversation toward me. Vicky, nothing personal, ma'am, but get it out of your ass. After what Susie did to me Friday night, she's lucky she didn't have a criminal case against her. In fact, it's still quite possible. Vicky was at first taken aback by my outburst, then looked at Susie. What happened Friday night? She asks. I look at them both and laugh. You didn't tell her? I say to Susie. Well, you do. You don't tell me the real reason you need that meeting. You don't happen to mention to your own lawyer that you kept me in the dark, and now you're also withholding important information from your own lawyer? What happened then has nothing to do with our divorce. I leaned back in my chair when the dreaded word finally came out. You don't think unlawful restraint and assault, for starters, will have any effect on the trial, do you? Susie, what haven't you told me yet? Interrogated Vicky. I'll tell you later, okay? She replies irritably. Let's just get this over with. Vicky glances at Susie and then turns her attention to me. Mr. Vickers, it seems you now know the purpose of this meeting. She pauses and glances at Susie again. She had spread a stack of papers across the table. At the very top was a divorce suit filed just after 9 o'clock this morning. I just stare at the document, not wanting to touch it. I look at Susie again. I can't believe you're doing this. I finally get out with a half sob. Shit, I'm looking at the papers. The ink isn't even dry. You said, Jake, I couldn't live with you after what you did to me. What you put me through. What I did to you? Are you kidding me? Susie doesn't answer anything. She looks like she'd rather be anywhere but here. I didn't do it, Susie? Her head falls back and she looks at me. I'm goddamn sick of listening to this shit, Jake. How can you keep lying? Because I'm not lying. Jake, we have proof. Then it's fake because it never happened. And why do I keep hearing about all this evidence, but no one has ever shown it to me? Susie just stares at me, then plucks a manila folder off the stack of papers in front of Vicky. She tosses the folder on the table. Here's your goddamn proof, asshole! I stare at her for a moment, then turn my attention back to the folder. I take it in my hands and slowly open it. On top is a 2-page legal affidavit. I flip through the first page, which basically states that I coerced my administrative assistant, Heidi Bevis. The second page contains just one paragraph describing how I need to improve my organizational skills to become a more effective manager. The second page also has Heidi's signature, and it has been notarized. I study Heidi's signature and have to admit to myself that it looks like hers, as well as her initials on both pages. I put the affidavit aside and find myself looking at 8 glossy 5x8-inch photos of Heidi and me having fun in the motel room. I gasp in amazement. I can see why someone might jump to conclusions, but surely anyone who knows me or Heidi would realize that we would never do this. I raise my gaze to Susie, her eyes drilling me. I don't know what to say. I finally managed to squeeze out of myself. I can't believe you were stupid enough to take pictures. I didn't take any pictures. Well, you're still stupid. I can't believe you cheated on me. I can't believe you treated that poor woman like that. I raise my eyes to her. You want to know why you can't believe it? You can't believe it because you know it's not true. Jake, please don't waste my time. Look at the pictures. I can't explain it, but I didn't do it. Give me some time, please. Don't rush things. Heck, if you don't believe me, think about Heidi. And don't think I didn't see the look in your eyes Friday night when I mentioned Heidi's name. Did you think for 1 minute that she would do that? You think I'd let you take pictures like that? Do you think Heidi would do that? I've had enough of this, Jake. I know better than anyone how good you are at weaving stories. I'm tired of your tricks. I'm tired of your lies. I'm tired of our life together. I don't want to spend another minute with you. Mr. Vickers, Vicky says firmly. I look at her, making no attempt to wipe away the tear running down my cheek. When you read the documents, you'll realize that the proposed agreement is quite fair. Since we have no children, we won't have to worry about paying child support. Miss Vickers chooses not to have any relationship with you after the divorce, so she will not be seeking alimony. The settlement agreement simply states that your joint assets are to be divided equally. The agreement will also include your severance pay from the firm. Each of you will want to take away a few things to consider. Hopefully, all of this will be agreed upon, and we can move quickly to divorce. I look at Vicky and for a moment I feel sorry for her. What a horrible situation she has gotten herself into. How can you be a lawyer and a friend to a couple and then find yourself siding with one against the other? I bite my lip and fold my arms for a moment, staring at the table. I didn't do anything. Those pictures have to be some kind of fake. And the affidavit has to be fake too. Heidi would never sign a document like that, even if it was evangelical. Where'd you get those? Who gave them to you, Susie? I look at her for help, for her to throw me some kind of bone. She suddenly averts her gaze, and I get it. You got them from Schmidt, didn't you? She doesn't answer. When? When did he give you those documents? Susie sighs. Thursday afternoon, she finally says. He came to my office and showed them to me. Wow, you didn't waste any time, did you? So my nemesis suddenly showed up and laid all this shit out for you and you believed it? You know damn well he and I were fighting for the same partnership spot, and I beat him. His only chance is if I'm discredited or expelled from the company. Do you trust the forged copies Schmidt gave you? Have I given you any reason not to trust me? Don't you have an ounce of doubt? Susie looks at me for a long moment before answering. No, Jake, I don't have an ounce of doubt. Tim didn't show me the forged copies. These copies, she waves her hand at the photos scattered across the table, I made for you. No, Tim didn't show me copies. He showed me the negatives. I even enlisted help and had the negatives looked at by the crime lab. The negatives were not processed in any way. They have not been tampered with. They are not forgeries. I sit stunned. How can that be? I'd like to see the negatives. Why, Jake? I've studied them discreetly. Now you have reason to doubt me? After Friday night, there still is. Besides, it's not you I'm questioning, but the negatives. Surely you wouldn't mind if I checked those negatives with my expert. Our marriage, my career, hell, my life is at stake, Susie. Surely you realize that. How do I know you won't destroy them? Why would I do that if I need them to prove my innocence? And what are you going to do when they don't? They will. Besides, let's say I can't prove it's a forgery. What's wrong with letting me try it? Susie looks at me for a moment, then reaches over to the stack of papers and picks up the top quarter of the stack. I watch her go through the papers until she reaches one large envelope. She peeks into the envelope, looks at me, and then tosses the envelope across the table to me. I expect them to come back undamaged. If anything, maybe this will finally get you to admit to cheating. Better yet, why don't you return them to Tim? She says coldly. How cozy that you know each other by name. I cast a return glance at her. Schmidt is obviously part of this setup, but as fast as you spread your legs in front of him, I'm starting to doubt you're part of the whole thing. You son of a bitch, she shouts. I'm not the one who cheated. Everything I did to Schmidt was revenge, you bastard. And anyway, who said I was with Schmidt? A soon-to-be ex-husband out to smear a poor devoted wife? Are you forgetting that I was there Friday night when you ambushed me? I witnessed the very adultery you accuse me of in this divorce decree. Of course you were at the house Friday night after your plane arrived, but I certainly wasn't there. I spent the evening at a friend's house, and she's willing to confirm that if need be. I have no idea where Schmidt was, but I assume he can confirm where he was too. I heard you were hospitalized. Nothing serious, I hope? You've got to be kidding, I sighed. All my legal skills go into not exploding. But just as I'm about to respond, something Vicky said earlier suddenly pops into my head. By the way, I turn around and ask Vicky, how do you know about the severance package? I look back at Susie. That offer was only made at 8 o'clock this morning in a confidential meeting. There's no way you should know about any severance package. I hope your statement doesn't mean you're going to try to hide Mr. Vickers' assets, says Vicky. That's not the goddamn point, and you know it, Vicky. I look at Susie again. How did you get this confidential information? Susie just smiles. She doesn't look away or hide her head or anything. She looks straight at me and smiles. Tell me, damn it, I insist. Something you're ashamed of? I tease. She looks at me. I'm not ashamed of anything except that I've loved you for the past 6 years. You know exactly how I found out about it. I got my information from the same person who took those pictures. I lean back in my chair and sigh. She says it with such smugness. Even if I prove the whole thing is a farce, I have to wonder if there's any hope for us. With a heavier heart, I turn and look at Vicky. Please pay attention to what your client just said, Vicky. At some point in the future, I may need her to repeat it under oath, and if she refuses, I will call you to the stand. Jake, you know you can't call her to testify because of attorney-client privilege. I'll bet that privilege would not be upheld if challenged. She will not testify to anything that has to do with you or any charges. It will only testify to where the information came from. I think we're done here, Vicky says abruptly. No, we're not done. I have 3 things to discuss. First, if the divorce goes through, there's no way in hell we'll be able to fairly divide all of our joint income. The house, for starters, is in my name only and belonged to me before the marriage. We all know that in this state, property owned before marriage is not considered part of marital assets. But adultery on your part changes the equation, Mr. Vickers, Vicky says calmly, and we have evidence of your complicity. Hypothetically, even if I had committed adultery, I doubt it would change the equation. Besides, adultery on Susie's part would equalize everything, wouldn't it? You'd be the one who would have to prove it, and you have no proof, Susie replies smugly. You stupid bee, I tense up, trying to stop myself. I calm myself down. Have you ever wondered what kind of man you let between your legs? Schmidt has made no secret of the fact that he's wanted to entertain you for a long time. And now that he's done it, you think he's going to keep it quiet? Jesus, Susie. I bet 24 people knew about Friday night before the weekend was over, I reply sadly. Susie, Schmidt is not a good man. Don't you realize he set this whole thing up to get to me? You're just part of the prize. I glare at her, shocked that she can't see how Schmidt tricked her. Anyway, I continue. Secondly, when I look at these pictures, do you realize that someone had to have taken them? Who do you think that would be? It's called a tripod with a remote trigger, Jake. What else do you want to discuss? I sigh. Third, you completely cut me off from all of our assets, credit cards, car, clothes, housing, everything. You threw me into... I flinch, trying to regain control of myself. In a calmer voice, I continue. You left me with nothing but a bag of wrinkled clothes. We can argue about bank accounts for the next few days, but I need my car, my clothes, and my personal belongings. And I need them today. Or do I have to go to court? You know I have a few friends who wear black robes too. Susie grimaces and furtively glances at Vicky, who looks disgruntled again. Susie reaches down and picks up her purse. Reaching inside, she pulls out a bunch of car keys and tosses them to me. I look at them, recognizing my keys. The D37 spot is in the garage across the street, she says. In the car, you'll find your toiletries and clothes. You can talk to my attorney to arrange a time when you can take your personal belongings out of the house under supervision. You said there were only 3 things. What else? I look at her and wonder if she was always this cold. Was she always so vindictive and out for revenge, but I never found myself on her bad end? I just want to know what your reasons are for continuing the divorce and not even talking to me about it. She nodded at the table. You're considering both reasons. So, affidavits and pictures? Those are all your reasons for divorcing me? Yes. You and I have had our differences, but I think we could overcome them. But I can't stay with a man who cheats. That is, cheats on me. So if I prove none of this is true, you'll give up the divorce and we can talk about reconciliation? Jake, please, give it up. Why don't you just admit to yourself that you screwed up and we can move on with our lives? I stand up and move towards the door, anger building up inside me and taking over. I turn around, keeping my hand on the doorknob. I didn't screw up, Susie, except maybe I loved you too much. I didn't sleep with Heidi. I can't explain the pictures yet or why Heidi signed that document, but I will. Count on it. I will contest this divorce. Count on it. I open the door and force myself to close it quietly behind me. I walk quickly down the hallway back to the reception area. I look around and see that all eyes are on me. I mutter to myself under my breath, "Why don't you just take a picture? It looks like everyone has already taken a picture." Chapter 4. Darkest Before Dawn. Monday, 10:46 a.m. After a little searching and using the remote key, I find my car in the parking lot. It didn't surprise me that there were trash bags in the back seat and trunk. They were all stuffed with clothes, even my suits. As I drive out of the garage, I'm still reeling from how much has happened in a short period of time. I can't understand how she could throw everything away without taking the time to at least meet me. I have to admit, the pictures look killer. And I can't believe Heidi signed that affidavit. I know there has to be something else, and I need to find Heidi soon to find out what it might be. But what am I supposed to do now? The plan I developed last night has been shattered by a major setback I encountered at the office. If it weren't for what Dad had told me about Green, I wouldn't have the slightest idea what to do now. I admit to myself, I'm stunned and completely clueless about how I feel and what I want. I keep feeling like this is all some big mistake. Somehow I'm still flying home on Friday afternoon, and everything is some kind of nightmare that I have yet to wake up from. But I know it's not a nightmare, at least not the one I'm sleeping in. I can't control my emotions. One moment I'm furious, and the next I'm crying inside and wondering how I can rebuild my marriage. But even then, oddly enough, I wasn't too affected by Susie filing for divorce. I already knew I would have to prove to her prosecutorial mind that I was innocent. I just didn't realize that I would have to do it under the added pressure of a divorce petition. Now I wonder if I should even bother. If she had filed for irreconcilable differences, I might have just walked out of our marriage, given what she did to me on Friday night. But her declaration under the adultery clause pissed me off. Sigh, as bad as things have been lately, at least I have a couple things starting to unfold and move in the right direction. It took me almost all of my remaining money to get my car out of the parking lot across from Gambino's office. Luckily, the gas tank is half full. First stop is the Western Union office, where I pick up the $10,000 my father wired to me. I had already picked up my new card at the American Express office when I left the firm. I then opened a new account in my name and deposited 9 of the 10,000 into it. The remaining 1,000 is nicely tucked away in my wallet. Now I'm desperate for services, and the first step is to take my dad's advice. After a 20-minute drive, I pull out of downtown Dallas into a small business district near Love Field Airport. I park next to an office building with a sign on the door that reads, Bud Green Investigations. Bud is an old friend of my father's. He used to work for my father, handling security for his company. When my father retired 7 years ago, just before Susie and I were married, my father helped him start his own investigations firm. In my role as general counsel for my own firm, I needed an independent investigator from time to time. I turned to Bud from the beginning, and he never disappointed me. He has developed a small but very effective team of investigators in his firm. They are fast, reliable, discreet, and accurate. Everything a lawyer could ask for. Do I need much right now? I think to myself as I hear the ringtone on my cell phone. As I sit in my car and stare at the front door of the Greens, I reflect on all the events that have already taken place this morning. Reluctantly, I realize that Vicky was right, and I need to set another mechanism in motion. 5 minutes later, I end the phone call and dial a second number. Bud Green Investigations, I introduce myself to Tracy. Hi, Tracy, this is Jake. There's a chance Bud will be in this morning. Oh, hi, Jake. Yeah, he's in the office this morning. I think he's back at the coffee shop flirting with Yolanda. Hang on a second, I'll see if he's free. Jake, what's up, kid? I heard Bud's murmuring voice about 10 seconds later. Hey, Bud. To be honest, I'm better now. How's Yolanda's coffee? I see Tracy is telling stories again. Well, if you can't flirt with your own wife in a coffee shop, who can you flirt with? I listened to Bud chuckle. Bud, I really need your help. I finally managed to speak into the phone. Do you have something sticky? You know we're always willing to help. This isn't a corporate investigation. This is personal, and a very important one. I don't like the sound of that, Jake. What can I do to help? Well, for starters, I want to take first place in your line and show you something. You're always first in my line, Jake. And I've always appreciated that. When do you have time to meet? I have a feeling that's a sooner rather than later question, Jake. So let's roll up our sleeves and see what kind of mess we've got going on here. Can you meet now? Sure. Do you want to meet at your office or somewhere else? I can meet at your office. Great. When? How about now? I'm in the parking lot. I look out the windshield at Bud's office and see the Venetian blinds parting. I wave my hand at him. What the hell, man? I hear Bud laugh. Get your ass over here. On my way. And a few minutes later, I'm sitting in front of his desk, laying out everything that's come to a boil. I bring Bud up to speed by telling him about Susie running into him on Friday night. I tell him what happened that night, but as briefly as he would let me. I mention that she cleaned out our bank account and canceled my credit cards. I tell him about what happened at my firm this morning, and finally all the details about my meeting with Susie and our lawyer. I watch him as I tell him all this information. You can see he's in sponge mode. Leaning forward, he listens intently to everything I say. In doing so, he is not judging me, whether I am right or wrong. I finish and we both lean back in our chairs. What do you have for me? I pull out the 3 manila folders I got from Susie earlier. I look through them until I get to the affidavit and show it to him. Supposedly, this is the original. Is there any way we can check to see if it's authentic? Bud hovers over it, scanning it quickly. With a whistle, he says, Boy, this doesn't paint you in the best light. He takes out the paperclip holding the 2 sheets together and uses tweezers to hold them up to the window. At first glance, Jake, it's authentic, but there's usually a lot lurking beneath the surface. I'll have my best man work on them. Good. I still have a copy left, and I hope to talk to Heidi later today. Are you sure that's wise? No, but it's what I have to do. I can't believe for a minute that she signed that affidavit. Bud looks at me for a minute. Damn it, Jake. I didn't believe for a minute that any of that was true. But remember, it's not what you believe that matters. It's what you can prove. Especially when you've already been found guilty. I nod in acknowledgement. I hand him the second folder, telling him it contains the negatives to the photos. Then I open the third folder, which contains the glossies and a copy of the affidavit Susie originally gave me. I spread the 8 photos out on his desk. He quickly looks through each one and whistles again. Now I see why she's mad at you, boy. It can't be me, I state. But I have a confession. Bud lifts his head and looks at me. I recognize the room where these pictures were taken. It's my hotel room from a week and a half ago in Houston. He sighs. It doesn't look good, Jake. Was your secretary there too? Yes, I admit. He continues to look at the photos and then starts to review them. I move to his side of the desk so I can see them from the same vantage point. Susie said one of the forensics experts looked at the negatives. Is there any way to tell if they've been tweaked? Depends on how good the tamperer was. You can usually tell. He leans over one of the clearer pictures and uses a magnifying glass to examine the photograph in detail. He leans back and grunts. I'll have them scrutinize the negatives. But from what I can see, they look pretty authentic. What's worse, Jake, the guy in those pictures looks exactly like you. He even has the same birthmark on his neck. Sighing, he said, Yeah, that didn't escape my attention either. But I can tell you one thing about those pictures. What's that? They were staged. Staged? Staged. How do you know that? For one thing, I've met your secretary, hell, administrative assistant, can't get used to all those computer titles. Anyway, not only has she never had an affair, but she wouldn't allow herself to be photographed while, you know. Second, you're not stupid enough to let yourself be photographed either. Third, look at the nightstand on this side of the bed. See the clock and the flip calendar? I look at one of the pictures and find both the clock and the calendar. Yeah, I see them. What about them? Notice that they're turned toward the camera instead of the bed? They should be turned toward the bed, or at least toward the table at the far end of the room. Also, I've never seen such flip day-by-day calendars in hotel rooms. And even if I had, it would have been on the desk, not on the nightstand, in full view of the camera. Do you remember if the hotel had such a calendar? Now that you mention it, no, I don't remember. But I can't say with certainty. But I don't recall one. That would be easy enough to check, Bud replies. Now, I have a couple questions for you. It says on the calendar that today is January 15th. He looks at the calendar. That was a Sunday. When did you check out of the hotel? I checked out the same day. Actually, the morning of the same day. I had to meet some other clients in San Antonio, so I went to the Puddle in the afternoon. I spent the night at the Marriott downtown, and then met with various clients Monday through Friday when I got home. And your secretary? When did she check out? She checked out on Sunday too, but flew back to Dallas. Or at least I think she did. Well, it's not good news that she was in Houston at the same time you were, but it is good news to know that you checked out on Sunday. We now know for sure that the pictures were staged. How do you know that? The calendar is already flipped to January 15th. But that's the day you checked out. So if that's you in bed, it must have been Saturday night, because by Sunday night you were already in San Antonio, right? Yes, that's right. But I don't see where you're going with this. Who flips the calendar the night before? Okay, maybe one or two people in the whole world, but most people get up in the morning and flip the calendar to the next day. This calendar is already flipped to Sunday, but the clock shows that it's 1:30 in the morning. Did you happen to flip the calendar to Sunday before you went to bed Saturday night? Hey, I exclaim. If I had flipped the calendar, I would have remembered everything. There's no way I flipped that calendar over. Then someone did it for you, chuckles Bud. But let's not get too excited just yet. It only suggests that someone set it all up, but it's not proof by itself. There's a lot more to check. Do you happen to remember what time you went to bed on Saturday night? Let me think. I think it was around midnight. We all gathered in the hotel lobby to celebrate a business deal we had managed to close earlier that day. Who was in your group? Your secretary? Actually, she wasn't there celebrating. But that's not surprising. She's very reserved and abstains from anything involving large amounts of alcohol. Where do you think she was? In her room, I suppose, but after 9 o'clock at night, I don't know. Okay. And from what you've just told me, we can assume she went alone. Otherwise, you might knock me over with a feather. Who was in your group at the celebration? Weston, Schmidt, and myself. Schmidt? Is that the guy who made your shorts mess up? I laugh. Yeah, that's the one. If you don't like him so much, why celebrate with him? It was more of a business commitment. Personally, I've never liked him, but he's a great vice president of sales. I have to admit, he's the reason the deal was done. And your little party ended around midnight? I don't know what time they left. I was the first one upstairs around midnight. They were still chugging their drinks. How many drinks did you have? Oh God, I don't know exactly. Were you drunk when you went upstairs? I wouldn't say drunk to the point of staggering, but definitely over the legal limit if I'd gotten behind the wheel. Like Weston, he was stoned out of his mind. What about Schmidt? I don't think so. I remember him buying 2 drinks, including one for himself, but he refused the drinks when it was our turn. Bud seems to be mulling that over. He raises an eyebrow and offers, What time did you get up on Sunday? I think to myself. I seem to remember getting up pretty late. Yeah, I remember. It was around 9 in the morning because I was really surprised that I slept that late. Even if I go to bed late, I usually get up around 7 in the morning. Did you have a hangover? I don't remember. I remember feeling out of sorts. I couldn't see to walk. I went for a run around 9:30 and got back around 10 o'clock. I felt a lot better and I think I was sweating. So I was a little hungover. Headache? It hurt a little, but like I said, more of a groggy feeling than anything else. Okay, that's good for a start, but I want to talk to you later today. I want to know more about your day on Saturday and Sunday, so you need to give me a full schedule of both days, and everyone else who was there with you. God, I'm not sure I can remember everything in detail, let alone anyone else. I don't need to tell you how serious this is. Knowing where all the players were, or at least where they were supposed to be, will help put this puzzle together. I nod in acknowledgement. Okay, bud. That sounds like a plan. You already know I won't be in the office. Besides, I have a couple other important things to do. Will you call me on my cell phone when you're ready? Sure, but take your time for now. I have a couple documents to sign, and one of them is very important. I watch as he opens a desk drawer and pulls out some forms. He holds them all out to me except for one. He nods at the one he holds out to me. You'll give these to Tracy, answer a few of her questions, and sign where she tells you to. That'll make it official. He pauses for a moment, and then writes down a few words on the form he still has. He holds the form out to me and tells me to fill out the top portion with my name and address. I do as he asks and start handing the form back to him. Just a minute, kid, he says. I look at him expectantly. You have to sign this at the bottom. You give us permission to enter your home and wiretap it. Audio, video, and phones. We can't do anything with her cell phone. That would be illegal. But otherwise, as a homeowner, you have every right to install surveillance equipment. Well, that would be great on a Friday night, but a day later and $1 less, don't you think? For Friday, yes, but from what you've told me, it's probably not too late for tonight. It suddenly hit me what he was saying. Of course, she wouldn't be having fun with that asshole anyway, right? He shrugs. Would you have predicted Friday night? I shake my head and grind my teeth. Placing the form on the table, I sign at the bottom with a flourish. Uh-oh, I say. We have a couple small problems. First of all, I'm under a restraining order to go near the house. There's no way I can let you into the house. Second, Susie took the key from me. The first is not a problem. There may be a court order against you, but there isn't one against me or this firm. And I wasn't going to invite you in anyway. Just let us do our job. Now for the second thing, do you have a hidden key somewhere? We can pick the lock if we need to, but I prefer not to unless it's necessary. Of course there is, exclaimed I, slapping myself on the forehead. In the shed behind the house, on the right side, there's a short 2x4 board nailed across two posts. Only it's not nailed very tightly. You can grab hold of it and pull it out, and there's a key on the back of it. But that's not enough. If you use the key and enter the house, you have 30 seconds to disable the alarm code. I can give you the one I knew, but what if she changed it? We'll take our chances. I suppose she'll believe you'd never try to violate the TRO, so she wouldn't change the code. But let's be better reassured. Why don't you make sure you have the security company's phone number handy? My man will be on the phone with you when he enters the house. If the code doesn't disable the alarm, you'll call them right away and take the call off. I smile. That sounds like it would work. Bud nods and holds out his hand. I shake his hand gratefully and tell him I'm grateful. Have you found a lawyer yet? He asks. That's one of the tasks I have yet to accomplish. I called the parking lot before I drove over to make an appointment. He nods. Just remember that any journey begins long before it begins. And I think we just took one good first step. I thank him again as he walks me to the door of his office. He only shakes his head and says, "No need, boy." On the way out, I stop for a moment to chat with Tracy. Once in the car, I sigh, but this time with relief. Bud has saved me in the past by providing information that his firm had uncovered. Now I need him to do it again. Monday, 12:12 p.m. 2 hours ago, I was at a complete loss as to who to choose as my representative, I think to myself. Susie, a well-respected but aggressive ADA, is highly respected by many members of our profession. She also intimidates many of them. So who can I get? I seem to remember a conversation I had with Susie about a month ago. An old law school buddy of hers had just started practicing in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Susie told me about how she caught him cheating on her after we had been dating for a while. She broke up with him immediately and never gave him another chance. I knew him pretty well, but when Susie and I started a more serious relationship, I naturally had to curtail everything I was doing with him. I even think he used to practice family law, although after he moved to Dallas-Fort Worth, he started practicing other disciplines. If anyone can understand the situation I'm in, it's Bill Benner. Besides, I don't think he would be intimidated or stunned to be across the street from Susie. And so, after a half-hour wait, I am ushered into his office. Bill, I greet warmly, extending my hand. Jake, he replies, shaking my hand just as firmly. I understand you talked my administrative assistant into giving you 15 minutes. He adds with a slight smile. That wasn't easy either, I reply. I definitely would have kept her around. He glances at his watch, and the subtle message becomes perfectly clear. What can I do for you? He adds. With as little time as I have, I can't afford to be in debt. I lean back in my chair and begin to outline everything that has happened over the past 4 days. I inform him of everything from Friday night to 5 minutes before I walked into his office. A few times he visibly reacts to my tale of woe, but for the most part, he listens passively but attentively. I talk nonstop until I finish and sit down to ask him questions. He stares at me for a while. I can't say I envy your situation right now, he finally admits. I don't envy it either. So, what can I do to help? There are only 2 lawyers in this town who have the guts to stand up to Susie. Both of them are in this room. I need someone to represent me. I hope you'll agree. Jake, he replies. I'd agree if I could, but I don't practice family law anymore. I know that. I did a little research before I stopped, but I know you were practicing, and that you were very good at it from what I've been able to dig up. I hope you have at least one more family law case. He looks directly at me, but I can see that his mind is puzzling over the dilemma I've posed. I can see that he wants it. The old, what I should do versus what I want to do dilemma. I'm about to say something, but I decide to just be quiet and let him run the thought through his head. Jake, he says, I'd really like to help you, but I just don't have the time. We have some attorneys in our firm who specialize in family law. Let me call them an AA and get you signed up with them. Susie would eat them for breakfast, and you know it, I interrupt. We stare at each other for a moment before he takes his hands in his own, as if they're linked. Yeah, I know, I realize. What if I make one last attempt? I get all the drafts ready. I'll have to remember old skills. But if you give me some tips, I'm sure I can prepare a few drafts that you'll only need to tweak. This will minimize the amount of time you will have to dedicate. But I'll still be able to utilize your talents. He looks at me in a new way. Will you agree to be not only my assistant, but also a caring client? You won't try to take matters into your own hands and turn this into a circus? Oh, shit, I laugh. I can't promise that at all. He smiles and leans back in his chair. Sighing, he finally says, I'm a fool. Does that mean you'll do it? Yes, but I'm going to regret it. Is there another meeting scheduled or any paperwork that is required right now? Smiling. Bill, I can't thank you enough. Wait until you see my fees. I laugh. No appointment right now. Bud Green has original evidence he's looking at. We have some anecdotal evidence that the photos were staged, but nothing concrete. The only thing I have scheduled now is a meeting with Heidi this afternoon and a meeting with the vetting committee the day after tomorrow. Heidi, Miss Beavis is or may have been your AA. Yes. I don't think it's a very good idea for you to meet with her. And who would? I can guarantee you she won't see anyone from this firm. It's either me or no one. I don't like it anyway. Neither do I. Heck, a lot of things have happened lately that I don't like. Do you really think she didn't sign that affidavit? I know she did. She wouldn't talk crap, much less perjure herself. And we didn't have any, not even Clinton style. There's no way she'd sign that affidavit. He leans back in his chair for a moment and thinks. Finally, he leans forward. All right, go ahead and talk to her. But I have one condition. I want one of my paralegals to go with you to document everything that's been said. You don't understand. She's a very shy person and keeps to herself. I'm already going to have a hard time trying to see her alone. If I bring a stranger with me, she won't agree to it. Just a few minutes ago, you agreed that I handle all matters. I don't want you talking to her without witnesses. Besides, I assume you are quite resourceful and persuasive. I bet you can get her to meet with you in front of my paralegal. Jake, if I'm your lawyer, I'll decide. You're not meeting with your AA without someone present to document what's going on. I smile. Okay, you win. When will your assistant be available? When would you like to see Miss Bevis? Now, if I can. Let me call, he says, reaching for the phone. Okay, I reply. And while you're doing that, let me find a time when we can see her. I get up and retreat to the window. I have Heidi's cell and home phone numbers. Surprisingly, I can't reach her on either of them. For a moment, I consider leaving her a message, but decide it's best not to. No luck? Asks Bill when I turn to him again. I shake my head. Janine is on her way here anyway. She's the one I want to bring with me to document any meeting. I'll just introduce you and then leave you in her capable hands. Also, from what you've told me about your situation both before and during your marriage to Susie, I'm going to have others in our firm review the divorce papers. But. No buts. I will handle all matters. I told you I would handle the case, and I will. I'll handle all the face-to-face meetings with Susie and her attorney. But we have a team of experts at the firm, and I'm going to use them. I nod in agreement. I didn't need to be hit over the head to realize that this is sound advice. Monday, 3:08 p.m. Okay, I know I shouldn't do this, but where the hell is she? I think to myself. I look at the front of Heidi's ranch house. I've been trying to call her home or cell number since I left Benner's office around 1 p.m. Something must be wrong, I think. Getting out of the car, I walk up to her front porch. The first thing I notice is that the lawn hasn't been mowed or watered recently. I check the mailbox and find it empty, which may or may not mean anything. Dropping the mailbox lid back into place, I take another look up and down the street and then quickly walk around the side of the house. I peek through the first window I see and am shocked to see nothing. Inside, the house looks empty. A very unsettling feeling overwhelms me, and I quickly walk around the outside of the house, seeing the same empty look in every window I look in. In just a minute, I've walked around the entire house and find myself in front of Heidi's house, puzzled and anxious. Thinking of buying? I hear behind me, startled. I quickly turn around and see an older man looking down at me. I relax a little and smile. No, I came to town a few days ago and decided to look for an old friend. I could have the wrong address, but is this where Heidi Bevis lives? I ask innocently. Well, I hate to break it to you, but you missed her by a week or so. She moved out of here. Really? I ask. For a week or so? That's too bad. I was hoping to laugh with her. Did she move to another part of town, or did she have a forwarding address? I really don't know, son, but I don't think she moved somewhere else in the neighborhood. I stopped by to talk to her. She was polite as usual, but she didn't tell me anything. I see. But you don't think she moved somewhere else? I don't know anything for sure. I just had this feeling. Well, I guess there's nothing more to do. My loss. But I appreciate your time. I shake his hand, turn and walk back to my car. I can feel his eyes drilling me every step of the way. I have a feeling that if he could find out where Heidi went, he would. Starting the car, I give him directions, turn around, and head back to Bud's house. It's not at all like Heidi to drive away without saying a word. And in fact, it doesn't seem like it's the right thing to do now. Monday, 4:15 p.m. I tap my pen on my notepad, trying to remember my itinerary for the last few days in Houston. Has it really been over a week already? Bud had said he wanted a chronology of my movements and as much information as possible about Weston and Schmidt. I knew where they both were most of the time, but there were certainly a few periods when we weren't together. I pulled my chair closer to the desk in one of Bud's spare offices. After being a little concerned about Heidi's whereabouts when I visited her home, I headed straight to Bud's office to let him know what I had encountered. Contacting Heidi will be crucial to finding out why she signed that affidavit, not to mention whether she knows anything at all about the photos. But first, I need to find out where she moved to and why. As I was driving back to Bud's place, I got a call from one of Bud's investigators. He had already found the hidden key and was ready to enter the back of my house. I stayed in touch with him while he unlocked the back door and then entered the code for the security alarm. Bud was right. She either hadn't thought or hadn't bothered to change the code. Once he was safely past the alarm, he made the call. Once I got to Bud, I told him about the trip to Heidi's. He snorted when he found out I'd gone there alone. He grunted a few more times when I told him about what I had found. He asked me to write down everything I could remember about her name, address, relatives, and anything else I could think of. I told him that I knew her parents were dead and that she had a brother, but he was somewhere far away, and she didn't really like to talk about him. I told him everything I knew, and he hurried away. Monday, 6:32 p.m. Feeling a little better, I hung up the phone in my room. I called my father to thank him again for the facilities and to recount the day's events. He hummed when I told him about how Susie had dropped the D word on me. He said he wasn't surprised, given the way she had spoken over the weekend, but he also said he didn't understand why she was in such a hurry. He said he hoped Susie would take her time when she had a chance to calm down a bit and think. He told me to hang in there and that things would work themselves out. Before calling my dad, I tried to reach Susie. I know I shouldn't have called her, but I was hoping I could break the impasse. Unfortunately, the receptionist wouldn't let me through, saying that Miss Vickers is busy with other matters. In other words, Susie wouldn't return my calls. So I called my father. Mom was the first one to answer the phone. As soon as she heard my voice, she hung up. I could hear her yelling for me to call my dad. And then I got a beer out of the mini fridge and sat down in the chair by the balcony door. It was too cold to go out on the balcony this time of year, but there was a nice view of the Dallas skyline from inside. On my second gulp, my cell phone rang. With a quick glance at it, I recognized Bud's number. "Hey, Bud," I answer it. "Hi, Jake," comes the reply. "I thought I'd call you and see how you're doing." I laugh. "I appreciate that, Bud. But is that really why you called?" "Of course I did, and I also called to give you at least some good news. I thought it might cheer you up." "Have you found Heidi yet?" "No, we're really just getting started, so you're going to have to be a little patient, boy. Rome wasn't built in a day, you know." "So what have you got for me?" "Get a pen and paper. You'll need to write all this down." 15 minutes later, I had the biggest smile on my face since Friday. "Now we still have a lot to figure out, Jake," Bud said. "But at least it's a start. Get some rest today. The next few days are going to be wild." "Thanks, Bud. You sleep well too. And thanks for everything." I lean back in my chair again and take a sip of the already warm beer. I continue to stare at the Dallas skyline. In the past 2 weeks, I feel like I've spent half my life in hotels. I'd love to go home. But where is my home now? I certainly doubt I'd be welcome in my home even if the ban wasn't in effect. What is Susie doing now? I wondered. How could she have gotten into all this so hastily? She's always been analytical, if anything. Well, impulsive maybe, but she's usually so good at thinking things through. We had our disagreements like any married couple, but she always gave me a chance to explain my point of view. I think I can say the same about myself. Why the sudden rush? Why the sudden anger? How could she take what she thought was revenge so viciously? And with that bastard Schmidt. She knew he was the man. To hell with her. How could she do that to him? I take another sip of my beer, the taste becoming bitter as it mingles with the anger bubbling up inside me. I pour out the rest of my beer and walk over to the mini fridge to get more. Collapsing in my chair with a mixture of frustration and anger, I mull over the information Bud just shared. I play with my cell phone before opening it and finally giving up and calling Vicky Gambino. Before I can utter a word, she asks if I've changed my mind about contesting the divorce. I reply that I've been thinking about it all day, that I have important information, and that I'd like to meet with her and Susie to discuss it as soon as possible. She asks if I have already found a representative. I replied that I was working on it. She said she would contact me and let me know when they could meet. A half hour later, she calls me back and asks if I can meet at 8 a.m. She says Susie will clear her schedule and can meet then. I bite my tongue, wanting to say that I know Susie doesn't start her day until 9 a.m., so there wasn't much time to spare for her schedule. Instead, I tell her that 8 a.m. is perfectly fine. Vicky confirms that the meeting will take place in her office and hangs up. As soon as my conversation with Vicky ends, I unsuccessfully try to reach Bill Benner. I leave him a voicemail message informing him of the 8 a.m. meeting. I tell him that there is a coffee shop on the first floor of the Gambino building and that if he can make it, I will make him a cup of coffee at 7:45 to discuss last-minute details. If he can't make it, don't worry. I'll inform him of the outcome. As I hang up the phone, I realize with annoyance that I probably just pissed him off by scheduling the meeting without his input. I finish my second mug of beer before making one last call to Bud around 9:30. I want to make sure he is aware of my meeting with Susie and Vicky and that I plan to share the information he gave me tonight. I tell him that I had hoped Benner would be able to make it, but feared that he wouldn't be able to make it. Bud asks if I have a copy of the photos with me. When I confirm that I do, he advises me to use them along with the other information he gave me earlier. We say goodnight to each other and agree to see each other tomorrow after I meet with Susie and Vicky. Chapter 5. Denial is a river in Africa. Tuesday, 7:45 a.m. I admit to myself that I'm shocked, but pleased to see Bill strolling through the small lobby in front of the coffee shop, and enjoy the look on his face as I pull a large coffee and muffin from a baggie on the table. Having taken care of the most pressing problem with the promised coffee, I start telling him about my conversations from the previous evening, especially the one I had with Bud. My mood is a little better this morning. After a few bad days in a row, things started to look a little better last night. It would have been a great day if we had found Heidi, but how far could she have gotten? It's only a matter of time before we find her, and that will help clean up this whole mess. But despite what happened on Friday, I still haven't given up hope of fixing my marriage to Susie. I know it won't be easy, and that we will need a lot of counseling. Susie has always been very jealous, almost insane. I learned long ago not to spend too much time with one woman at a party, and if I danced more than once with someone else, there would be a couple cold days in the house. Seeing the pictures and knowing how jealous she was, I mentally understand why she was so angry. But emotionally, I'm having a really hard time dealing with all of this. I don't know what's worse, the ugly scene on Friday night or the obvious disbelief in me. But before reconciliation can happen, I have to get her to see things clearly. But by the time that happens, I probably won't care what to do anymore. As soon as I bring Bill up to speed, he begins to berate me for scheduling this meeting without his input. He makes it clear that if I do it again, he'll ask me to find another representative. I nod in agreement, knowing that this will happen and that it is deserved. After the MEA culpa is over, we spend the next 5 minutes finalizing our battle strategy for the 8 o'clock meeting. We went over the pictures I have and how best to present the information I got from Bud. With a plan drawn up, we both squeakily push back our chairs and walk to the elevators. Tuesday, 8 a.m. As we enter Gambino's office, I am surprised to see Vicky in the reception area waiting for us. I let the two attorneys introduce themselves to each other, whereupon she invites us to follow her, and we walk down the hallway to the very room I found myself in yesterday. Susie is talking on her cell phone, standing with her back to the door as we enter. Vicky moves to the other side of the table in the same pose as I did the day before. Bill and I take seats on the side of the desk closest to the door as Susie finishes leaving a message for some poor subordinate. Susie turns and sees my lawyer, automatically extending her hand for a handshake and greeting. She stops with her outstretched hand halfway to Bill and slowly recoils. She looks at me, then smiles and sits down. How wonderful. She grins. 2 crooks in one pod. Bill and I don't even look at each other. We were discussing what Susie's reaction would be when she saw Bill introducing me. We weren't far wrong in our predictions. Mr. Benner, Vicky begins, turning to my attorney. Did Mr. Vickers inform me in a phone conversation yesterday that he has reconsidered our asset allocation proposal? I look at Bill. He smiles and turns to both women. Actually, Miss Gambino, from what my client told me, you jumped to the conclusion that he had reconsidered his decision. My client merely said he had information to share. They were both taken aback. Did they really expect me to capitulate? Susie pushes away from the table in anger. What are you trying to do to Jake? She accuses. Mr. Vickers isn't trying to pull anything, Mrs. Vickers, Bill says, stressing her married name. He's informed Miss Gambino that he has important information, and we're ready to show her right now. Jake, would you like to share what we discovered yesterday? Bill looks at me. I drop my gaze to the two women. Vicky is genuinely interested, but it's hard to read anything behind the frown on Susie's face. First, we still have the negatives, but we promise to finish with them today. I'll make sure to get them back to you, Vicky, by the end of tomorrow at the latest. Susie only hums, and Vicky confirms my words with a nod. We've studied the negatives and also enlarged them. There are a few things in the pictures that we think are disturbing, I say. Taking a folder out of my satchel, I open it and pull out 3 photos and place them on the table in front of Susie and Vicky. These 3 pictures are the first, 4th, and 8th in a series of 8 pictures. I admit that it certainly appears that the man in the pictures is me. We also know that this was my hotel room in Houston. The closet door, which coincidentally was left open, shows luggage on the floor that looks like mine, and the clothes also look like mine. I look up and see a look of smugness and contempt on her face at the same time. But there's more to it than that. Is it really sadness? Does she really want me to prove that the pictures aren't of men? Yet there are quite a few things in the pictures that raise serious doubts about their authenticity. That's utter nonsense, Susie states emphatically, standing up. I had my best investigator examine the pictures, and he assured me that they were genuine and not doctored. We didn't say the pictures had been tampered with, Bill objects. Then what are you saying? That's exactly what the hell it sounded like, declares Susie emphatically. It's Vicky's turn, who places her hand on Susie's forearm, encouraging her to sit down. First of all, we're still studying the pictures, so this is all preliminary, I say. In other words, you can't prove anything, Vicky says. At this point, some of what we've discovered is our best guess, but other information is tentative. We expect to get a lot more information today. Like what? Asks Vicky. I'm not interested in listening to any more of their fabrications, nonsense and lies, says Susie. We have to listen to them, Susie, grumbles Vicky. It'll either be here or in court. Fine, she says, leaning back in her chair and crossing her arms. First, we noticed that all the pictures were taken between 1:30 and 1:32. That's a very short period of time. If these photos were taken by someone secretly, like a private investigator, they would have taken many more pictures than 8, and they would have been spread out over time. I pause to see if there will be any reaction. Vicky just asks him to continue. The second thing we want to point out is that the man in the picture doesn't move the entire time. Not a single movement. We know from the clock that this time is at least 1 minute and 2 seconds, and possibly as much as 3 minutes. I look directly at Susie. Susie, the man in this picture didn't move at all for 3 minutes. Who can lie perfectly still for 3 minutes? Sighing, I struggle to continue. We also want to point out that these photos were clearly staged, using Bud's words from yesterday. Staged? How did you come to that conclusion? Asks Vicky. First, look at the calendar and the clock. They were turned and facing the camera, not the bed or most of the room. I pause for a moment and pull a piece of paper out of my folder. This is a plan of the room with dimensions. You can see that from the bed to the outside wall is only about 4 feet. There is no chair, table, or any other furniture in this part of the room except for the floor lamp. There is no logical reason for the calendar and alarm clock to face the outside window, except that it would be advantageous as a chronological timestamp for whoever was taking the pictures. That's a wild leap of logic, Vicky replies. Everything you've said is just conjecture and guesswork. On the contrary, Bill quickly objects. It makes no sense that the clock should be turned toward the window instead of the bed. Can you give me one reason why? Easily, says Vicky. Mr. Vickers got up in the morning, hit the snooze button, and turned the clock over. Susie snorts a short laugh. I look at Vicky in shock. So far, she's behaved professionally and hasn't taken cheap shots. I realize she was Susie's spokesperson, but still she managed to be poised. I couldn't help myself and just stared at her. She held my gaze for 5 seconds and then turned her head slightly. Do you have such a cute answer for the calendar too? I asked coldly. What the hell is wrong with the calendar? Asks Susie. You're cute too, I reply even more coldly. But maybe you didn't check with the hotel to see if they use similar tear-off calendars with large print for one day and one page. If you had bothered to do any checking at all, instead of just swallowing the testimony of a man who is known to be my enemy, you would have discovered that they don't provide calendars in the room at all. I know for a fact that I didn't put that calendar in my room. So who did? Who put the calendar in my room? Why is it turned toward the window? I pause for a moment, hoping this fact will come to my consciousness. Susie, do you remember what day I left Houston on my last trip? Susie just sits at the table with her arms crossed and stares at me coldly. I sigh again. Let me remind you. It was Sunday the 15th. Whatever you say, she replies. You know what my itinerary was. I know what you told me. Frowning in frustration, I reach into my bag and pull out another folder. Opening it, I lay 2 documents on the table. The first is a copy of my plane ticket from Houston to Austin. The second is a copy of my hotel check-in after lunch in Austin. Notice both of them show the 15th of the month. Okay, you were in Austin on the 15th. Big deal. And in the photos in front of you, what day is listed on this miraculously appearing calendar? Susie doesn't move, her eyes staying fixed on my face. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Vicky leaning forward. It says here the 15th. Exactly, I reply. On the evening of the 14th, Weston, Schmidt, and I had just closed a major deal in Houston in one of the hotel conference rooms. Our entire group then went out to celebrate, all except Heidi, who, as usual, didn't join us for the alcohol-related celebration. I'm not sure about Schmidt, but I know Weston drank quite a bit. I had 1 beer and then water. But my point is, do you know anyone who, when they go to bed, turns over one of those calendars for the next day? Isn't it amazing that this miraculously appearing calendar also miraculously shows the correct date at 1:30 in the morning? Didn't it strike you as odd, Susie, that Schmidt gave you the negatives? Why use an old camera that works in ASA mode? Maybe a professional would still use an ASA film camera, but just about everyone else in this decade uses digital cameras. Maybe Schmidt was afraid that you would believe that digital photography is fake, as it easily is? Didn't that seem suspicious to you? Did you notice that the camera used a flash? You can see the shadow of the chair on the wall. With the flash, of course, it was much easier to recognize the 2 people in bed. So if you thought these photos were taken secretly, they clearly weren't. And the fact that a flash was used means that the pictures couldn't have been taken with a telephoto lens through a hotel window. So whoever was lying in that bed was either well aware of the presence of the camera or was drugged. And even if you think I would be stupid enough to allow myself to be photographed in that position, you know perfectly well that Heidi would never allow it. I look at Susie. For a moment, I see her features soften as my onslaught reaches consciousness. For a moment, I see possibility. Then, almost as quickly, a hard prosecutorial mask descends upon her features. What was your purpose in coming here, Jake? Susie asks. Did you come here to amaze us and surprise us with how good you are at lying and telling the truth? What the hell did you prove? Okay, I'll accept that the picture was taken in the room. What does that prove? That you're that stupid? You keep talking about calendars and clocks and luggage. What have you proven? You know what? It's still a picture of you and Heidi in that bed. It's still a picture of you two having fun. I will never forgive you for cheating on Jake. Ever. Do you understand that? Now just get out of here and stop wasting our time. I look at Bill. He shrugs his shoulders. He turns to the two women again and looks directly at Vicky. It has become obvious to Jake and I that no matter what evidence we present, it will not be able to change your client's mind. I believe that even if Schmidt comes here and confesses under oath, she will not change her conviction. In that case, we're leaving. But before we do, we have a few more tidbits of information to share. First, we have not yet decided to prosecute your client on charges of assault and unlawful restraint, just to start. And if your client has decided to have one of her friends provide an alibi, you might want to remind her that as a prosecutor and officer of the court, she can get in trouble not only for perjury, but also for inciting others to perjure themselves. Are you accusing my client of anything, Mr. Benner? Asked Vicky quickly. Not at the moment, no. But you might want to inform your client that the hospital where she and Schmidt unceremoniously dumped my client Friday night unconscious, in boxers and a bathrobe, has recently installed a high-definition video system. It's actually a very impressive system because the image is so clear that we can not only make out her license plate number, but we can see her and Schmidt arguing. We have a professional, a lip-reading specialist, who should be able to decipher what they were arguing about. As Bill gives his little speech, I sit back and watch Susie's complexion slowly fade. She clearly realizes what the consequences would be if we allowed her to perjure herself before we presented contrary evidence. She also realizes that her ability to deny the love affair has been weakened, as has any defense that she physically assaulted me. Furthermore, Bill continues, we have read the divorce judgment, and there are 3 issues that we will contest and will not discuss. First, the house was inherited and wholly owned by my client prior to his marriage to Miss Vickers. We will not give up any part of the house. Second, we will not give up any part of the severance package that may or may not be offered. My client is willing to simply resign and leave his firm before he will share any portion of the severance pay that was received at the fault of your client's mistress. Also, keep in mind that we will eventually get to the bottom of this case. If we find evidence that your client was part of this setup from the beginning, we will not hesitate to turn over all evidence to the state authorities. One last thing. My client will not sign a divorce decree if it states he is guilty of adultery. We are giving you until Friday to withdraw the current divorce petition and refile it, citing irreconcilable differences as the reason. If this does not happen by the end of business Friday, we will file a countersuit on Monday, charging your client with adultery. This should make interesting press for the ADA. We expect to receive additional forensic information within the next few days. We will forward any such information to Ms. Gambino's office. It may be prudent to reopen the discussion when more information becomes available. Silence enveloped the room. That would be pointless, Susie finally says, regaining her complexion and rigidity. He's a cheater, Susie says, nodding at me. And I won't live with a cheater. You're wrong, Susie. I never cheated on you, I say, biting my tongue since we both know she cheated on me. Susie waves her hand at the 3 pictures Bill is carrying away. Apparently you cheated on Jake. Bill and I get up and I turn to leave, but we stop when I hear Bill's voice. Susie, Bill says, are you absolutely sure Jake cheated on you? Yes, she replies simply and coldly. Are you sure? There's no chance you could be wrong? No chance that you're being deceived or that you're misinterpreting the situation? Misinterpreting? Gasped Susie. Look at the photographs. Look at the affidavits. How can you misinterpret that Heidi was sitting on his waist? Are you as sure that Jake cheated on you as you are that I cheated on you? He asks suddenly out of the blue. I turn around completely and look at Bill. What's going on here? Bill shouldn't bring up the subject of their past. Not here, not now. Susie ignores me and stares at Bill with undisguised contempt. Yes, I'm just as sure, she spits out. What's more, I'm even sure you cheated on me. I saw with my own eyes you hugging and kissing that 18-year-old tramp. Bill stares at her intently. 10 years ago, you never gave me a chance to explain. What's there to explain? Grinned Susie. I saw what you two were up to. No doubt she was headed for your bed. Yes, I'm sure of it. You're both bloody lying cheats, just like... Susie swallows the rest of the sentence, and judging by the sour expression on her face, it must be bitter. Bill sighs and starts to turn away. He looks at me, his face scarlet red with anger. I'm beginning to think it was a serious mistake to ask him to represent me. Suddenly, he turns back to Susie, reaches into his shirt pocket and pulls out an old photograph. Bill reaches across the table to hand it to Susie, but she recoils from the table like Bill is a snake. Bill drops the photograph on the table in front of her. I can't help but look at it and see a very attractive blonde pixie style. The photo practically radiates cuteness. Do you recognize the person in the picture? Asks Bill. Susie looks at him and then looks up at him again. Yes, I recognize it. I rarely forget faces. She scoffs. How do you think I could forget? This is the same slut I saw you hugging and kissing. If I thought Bill looked angry before, I was wrong. The anger on Bill's face disappears and is replaced by rage. That slut, as you call her, is my little sister. She was 20 that day in Austin, not 18. And she wasn't headed for my bed. Instead, she was on her way to spring break in Corpus Christi from Washington State University. She knew she would have a stopover in Austin, so she carved out time to stop by to see her brother, whom she hadn't seen in 2 years, and was so glad she hugged and kissed him. I was hoping to introduce you too. Bill picks up the picture and slips it back into his pocket. Bill looks at me. I think she might be wrong. Shall we go, Jake? He nods his head toward the door. As soon as Bill opens the door, I look back at Susie, her mouth open in surprise and shock. She notices me looking at her, and the emotionless prosecutor's mask I've seen so often reappears and descends over her expression like a lead curtain. I don't know who you are anymore. I think to myself, turn and follow Bill out the door. As I start to close the door behind me, I hear Susie's voice. Screw you. Screw both of you. I stop and open the door again to poke my head inside. I look straight at Susie. Screw you? I repeat coldly. Susie, since you've tarnished yourself by entertaining that asshole Schmidt, you'll never entertain me again. I close the door behind me, and the two of us walk toward the reception area while I shake my head. No one wins in these cases, I think to myself. End of Part 1. Part the 2nd of May be coming out in 12 hours. Write in the comments if you're waiting for it. Also give a like under this video and subscribe to my channel. I hope you enjoyed this video.